Hey everybody, my name is Nick. Welcome back to the Jamsey Online YouTube channel. Today we're going to be tearing down this 350 Pontiac that came in for a complete rebuild. If you haven't noticed yet, I'm doing a voiceover because I forgot to make sure that the camera microphone was plugged in when I started recording, so the first few clips here don't have any audio with them. This is a 350 cubic inch Pontiac V8 out of our customer's 1968 Pontiac Firebird. This particular engine is the 2-barrel carb 350 as opposed to the 4-barrel high-output 350 that was also available in 1968. I started tearing into this engine by pulling all of the accessories off of the intake. It's also important to remember to take out the coolant bypass bolt that attaches to the timing cover before attempting to remove the intake from the engine. I went ahead and spun out all of the intake manifold bolts and then removed the valve covers just so that they would be out of the way when I lifted off the intake. These are not the original valve covers, nor is this the correct original paint color. And while the intake isn't super heavy, it can be awkward to lift over the head, so I opted to use the hoist and save my back. Future me probably thanks me. With the intake off, we have access to the valley pan, which can be removed after spinning out the 2 bolts holding it in place. And on first look at the valve train of this engine, we aren't seeing anything crazy that jumps out aside from the usual wear that you expect to see in a used engine. From here, I removed the spark plugs and got to work disassembling the valve train. And I plugged in the microphones. So with the rocker arms off, I'll pull the guide plates out, we'll pull all the push rods, and then we'll get the heads pulled off and we'll get the heads torn down, see what we're working with there. I'm going to leave that center one tight just to hold it on there. Now I got it loose with that one bolt in there so it wouldn't fall out. And it should come right off. First thing we kind of are doing is inspecting our rocker arms, and you can see the tip where the valve contacts the rocker arm. These are pretty well shot. The lifters and the cam down in the valley, nothing is jumping out at us here as far as abnormal wear. This is just kind of what you expect to see in a flat tappet cam and lifters after, who knows how many thousands of miles. Moving on to kind of inspecting the pistons and the cylinders, you can see we've got, a little bit of carbon here. There's a tiny bit of ridge here. Nothing super excessive, but again, just kind of normal wear. One thing that does jump out, if you look at, say this piston, the carbon is basically the same all the way around, same here, but in this cylinder, you can see it's pretty wet with oil, and you can see down in there that around the edge of the piston, it's nice and clean. All that carbon has been washed off, and that's kind of an indicator to us that this cylinder may have been using oil and letting oil come up past the rings, and that's what has cleaned off that carbon. Moving on to the opposite bank of cylinders, we kind of have some similar stuff going on. I mean, most of them look just a little bit carboned up, nothing crazy, but what we're thinking we may run into as we get further into this engine, this cylinder may have a rod bearing out, because you can see there on the end where, and basically on the top side and on the bottom side there, you can see where the piston has been coming up and appears to have been hitting the head. And that's kind of an indicator that we're going to find a rod bearing that's out. You can kind of see the same kind of thing on the cylinder heads when you look at them. This is that cylinder from the first bank that we looked at that you can see is pretty wet, that looks like it was probably getting oil up past the rings. And this cylinder here is the one where you can see right there on the edge of the head where it appears as though the piston was coming up and contacting the head. Heads are torn down. Didn't really find anything too surprising on them. From here, the valves, the heads will get baked. Springs will get washed with some other parts that we're just going to wash in the spray cabinet. And we'll just kind of go from there. Once we get them cleaned up, we can do a little better inspection of them. But right now, I'm not seeing anything crazy. Hey, they did drain it. Don't do that. So there we took apart the little mechanism for the oil filter bypass, and inside was this little piece that may be a part of the rod bearing that we're gonna find. So I'm gonna start buzzing the oil pan bolts out, and the reason I don't just roll the engine over is because then all the residual oil that didn't completely drain out, that just goes all over and it just makes a mess. So I like to actually just do it from the bottom, rotate it over, do this side, rotate it over, do the other side, and just drop the pan straight down so that it doesn't make a mess. Problem is, this is just, it's got studs on it, so it's a little tougher than just bolts that you take out and then it just pops off. And then this thing is just full of rust. So I know all those studs all the way back are just rusty as rusty can be. There we go. Whew. Go. Finally, on the inside of this thing, I'm going to go through, number the rods, make sure everything is numbered so that it's in its correct place, so that we keep the caps matching to the rod, and then we'll tear it down and see what we find. So I've got the first rod cap off, and what we're finding is there's definitely some metal that has gone through this at some point. There were flakes of metal on the crankshaft journals. You can see them there kind of on my finger there, and that's kind of what the bearings look like. So here you can see what I was talking about. Here's the top half bearing. Piston's out, and see that right there is actually just a flake of the bearing material left there on the crankshaft, and that's not even the one we're expecting to be bad.
$15.55 CPA Federal Mobile. No date.
Let's see. I don't see a date.
But that's been a long time since that was done.
So as we suspected, this was the cylinder with a piston that we saw that looked like it had been hitting the head, and it did indeed lose a rod bearing. You can see the bearing is absolutely trashed, spun in the rod, and tore up the crank a little bit. So we're gonna have to do a lot of checking on this and see what's usable and salvageable, and go from there. At this point, we've got all the pistons and rods out, getting ready to take the main caps out, and we'll pull the crank. Here I'm getting the pistons pressed off the rods so that we can recondition the connecting rods, so they'll be baked, shot blasted, and then we'll go ahead and recondition them, resize them, make them new again. And then we'll go through, press the rod bolts out of the rods. That way they're ready to be reconditioned. So the main bearings have had the same, metal go through them from that rod bearing, so they're a little chewed up as well.
Last guy.
This cap is cracked. corner. Dad blamed the last guy.
Well, the last guy never got that lined up, and he started sucking it down with the impact.
Crank is out. As you can see, metal went through this entire thing, so you can see the bearings are a little chewed up. I'm gonna get the rest of the bearings out, get the cam bearings out, freeze plugs out, and then we'll go in the oven to bake our parts that get baked, and we'll clean the parts that get cleaned. And some of this damage is from me pulling the plug out, but this one in the back here already was rusted clear through. Go.
Is it there?
Yeah. Thanks. Alright, I'm taking out these studs because they would just be a pain to work around, especially when I glass bead this block. This is one of our stud tools that people ask me about. It's basically just, it has a lot of different collets basically that fit different size studs, and then as you can see, it just kind of pulls that collet in tight and then unscrews the stud right on out. And then you just take it and give it a tap, stud comes out, put it in the bucket to bake. So at this point, I've got everything out of the block except I got to take it off the stand so I can get to the back freeze plugs, a couple oil galley plugs, and knock the front two from oil galley plugs from the back once I get the screw-in ones out. So I'm going to get kind of cleaned up here and organized, and we'll get everything in the oven to bake and go from there. All the plugs are out. Let's get this thing in the oven, get it baking so that we can move on forward to the machining. All right, everybody, that wraps up the teardown on the 350 Pontiac. I'm gonna try to do a pretty complete series on this engine, so we're gonna take you through all of the machine work that we do, as well as the assembly on this. So it's probably gonna be a 2 to 3 part series. So if you enjoyed the teardown, let me know what I did good or what I can improve on, and stay tuned for the next videos in the series. If you don't mind giving it a like and subscribe to our channel, that really helps us out. Dad and I, obviously, we work really hard running the machine shop, and we've got a couple employees who help us out with our e-commerce side. And now we're kind of leaning into the content creation as well, and everybody seems to really enjoy it, and we enjoy making it, but it is a lot of work, so it does help us out if you don't mind subscribing. And like I said, drop a comment, let us know what we did good, what we did bad, and stay tuned for the next one.